Thank you. You guys, welcome back to RevU. Thank you for being here. I am personally very excited about this event. I have two of my very dear friends here with me today. First up, we have Karen Rodriguez La Paz. She is the founder and CEO of Code and Color, an organization focused on creating innovative pathways for Black and brown young adults to gain access to high-quality tech education and job opportunities. She's also the head of marketing at the Utah Black Chamber and an expert in helping organizations improve their company cultures. Rodriguez is a former lobbyist, grew up in New York City, and has worked on statewide and national anti-poverty, healthcare, and immigration policies before founding Code and Color. A recap of her life story can be watched in Netflix's The Kindness Diaries. With us today, we also have Cameron Russell Williams. He's the Director of Partner Solutions and the Director of Diversity at Domo, as well as the founder and CEO of Everwoke, Inc. Cameron is also an active member of the community, sitting on several boards and advising on DEI efforts across the state. Cameron has spent his career looking at ways to be innovative and think outside of the box. This is the approach he has taken both professionally and across all DEI efforts. Joining us virtually, we also have Joan Mulholland. She is an original freedom writer, and a civil rights activist. She has now dedicated her life to promoting love and equality for everyone. So please welcome our special guest today. Karen, thank you for being here. Joan, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Beautiful. Welcome, welcome. We can see you. Hello.
Hello, everybody. Good to be here.
Good. Thank you for
virtually.
being here. Of course, of course. I want to start out at the very beginning, just talking about identity. When did you first become aware of your race or ethnic identity? Let's do a quick sound check.
Hey.
There we go.
Ooh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, so that's such an interesting question because as we think about who we are and where we come from, I'm from Dominican Republic. So when we talk about culturally in Dominican Republic, it's not, you just say you're Dominican, right? But when I moved to the United States, I started to learn about my history, and I started to learn about, what actually makes a Dominican people. I had to come to an understanding of what are my Black roots, and how did I get them, right? And how do I move forward knowing how my ancestry really affects or impacts who I am today? And I get to really be proud of that now.
Yeah, for me, is my voice making the, okay. For me, I feel like I learned about my racial identity from others telling me I wasn't being what I was supposed to be or whatever. When I was very, very young, I grew up around mostly Black people. And so, at that point in time, nobody was really saying, oh, by the way, you're Black, you're this, But then when I went to a church camp, and it was an all-Black church camp, but it was like in the hood where I'm from. Uh-oh, am I out? Okay. It was like more in the hood, and they were telling me like, oh, well, you don't talk like us, you don't act like us, you don't act like a Black person. And that's when I figured out that there was a thing called a Black person and an expectation around what that is amongst the Black community. And so, yeah, but I was very young, I would say.
I had a similar experience as well. So once you came to kind of realize your racial identity and came to terms with that, not came to terms, but we're very proud of that. How was your understanding of your racial and ethnic background dictated, and how did you navigate the world around you? And how has it navigated your professional career?
I think that I just took a lot of pride in it. So I was like, I'm walking in my identity. Like, it's very visible. I am Black, you can see it, right? And so part of that is owning that and, expecting that people get rid of their biases. Like, I'm not going to compromise who I am. I'm going to be myself fully in every single space that I, exist in, right? And that's a journey that doesn't happen overnight. That's been years of me learning about myself. However, I think that, it still doesn't mean that that I don't code switch, right? Because professionally, you do have to engage in code switching to ensure that, you're communicating like properly, that you are not perceived a certain way because those biases still exist. But still be proud of yourself when you walk in, like own who you are.
Sure. Will you explain code switching a little bit?
Yeah. So code switching is essentially, and you should chime in on here, but code switching is essentially when you change a little bit about how you would normally act with your friends to fit into that particular environment that you're a part of.
Now, am I supposed to be part of this conversation at this point, or when do I get into it?
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. You can join in whenever you would like.
Okay, on the code switching for speaking, I have talked about teaching minority group students. That was the subject. And I said, first of all, never tell them they're speaking bad English. They're speaking a different dialect. Mm-hmm. And one dialect is as good as another. It's just when people understand it and when you use it.
Totally.
And I would say on, ethnic identity, I'll go back to the prior topic because you didn't turn to me.
I apologize.
You're forgiven this time. But I identified from the beginning as a Southerner. White was a given. It wasn't anything I had to become aware of. But growing up in Northern Virginia and living in Washington State in World War II, my roots were in the South. And I was a Southerner, and I still am, because Robert E. Lee is my homeboy, and I make no apologies for him. But I think, like you identified as a Dominican, it's where you're from that establishes who you are to a large extent. Okay, I'm done.
So by no stretch of the imagination am I disagreeing with Karen or Joan.
Thank you, sir.
However, there are things that I think I look at a little bit differently. I hear a lot of complaints about code switching and the need for code switching and things like that. And to me, I always ask people where the line is between code switching and basic professionalism. And in my mind, when I go to work, I'm not a different Cameron. What I am is a professional Cameron. And to me, that's not Cameron at home. Cameron at home is in sweats and, calling people boy. Like I'm saying all kind of stuff like where that's the communication style that I have. I'm from Chicago. My natural language is to speak very fast, and I have an accent when I talk amongst my friends, and I speak differently at work. I speak differently in certain settings. I dress differently. I have a different level of attention and care in the way that I approach business. From that perspective, to me, many people would call that code switching. I call it professionalism, and to me, that is a universal language. And I think it is something that everyone needs to know how to turn on and turn off. They need to know how to be a part of their community, but business is its own community, and it's frankly pretty universal. And again, not to say I disagree, I just think that, speaking with a different dialect is one thing, but if you're not accomplishing your job because people literally can't understand you, that's a totally different thing. If I talk with my normal accent in my normal voice, the people that I sit in meetings with here in Utah would be like, what did he say? I didn't catch any of that, And so I speak differently to be heard, right? And just on the idea about identity. Joan, I love you. I don't even know you personally, but I feel like I do because I know so much about you, and I know your son. He sits on the committee with us in the Black Chamber. So you have a lot of respect in my heart. But I do disagree that where you come from dictates who you are. I think where you come from is an element of who you are. I think it's an element of the things that you learn, but it does not necessarily dictate who you are. Otherwise, I shouldn't be on stage right now. You know,
Well, I say it doesn't dictate, it doesn't control, but it might be how you feel about yourself. I'm looking at it that way, that I feel I am a Southerner, and I can speak about the South.
Yes.
But I can't speak much about Utah. So there you go. Or Chicago.
Joan,
Except it's up north.
Joan, I would love to direct this question at you. You have seen the progression of the civil rights within the U.S. from early on. Can you talk to us about the philosophies that you saw within the civil rights movement?
Well, we were strong on Gandhian nonviolence in the civil rights movement. That if you took the beating, if you took the insult and didn't answer back, you might overcome evil with good. And if you just lowered yourself to their standards, you were just as bad. Now, then things got, with the Panthers and all, it took a change. The Panthers aren't all they were made out to be. They also, the Great Society was based on what those folks were doing on community service. And I don't know how much the philosophy or, what that type of thing is that has changed. But now these civil rights, Black Lives Matter, which I would support, has become much more inclusive of everybody. More folks are joining up to where it's a no majority thing. It's this minority and that minority, and much vaster. And I think it still pretty much sticks to the nonviolence, that the violence comes from outside. And I think Christianity has become less a part of it, because we were very church-based back in the day. Well, the only place you could meet was in the church, because the white folks didn't own it, and the music was based on the church music, which isn't so much the case anymore. It doesn't sound like you're in church, but it's more an everyday type thing, I think, now.
So talk to us about this photo. It was taken during one of the most famous sit-ins during the civil rights movement. Talk to us about that day. What did you see and what did you feel?
Well, now, where's the photo?
It's up on the screen.
Oh, I can't see the screen, but I can tell what it is. That was in Jackson, Mississippi, at the Woolworth lunch counter. We were a little behind the times. People identify the sit-ins with 1960, and this was May 28th, 1963. And it was organized by Medgar Evers and John Salter from Tougaloo College, and it was, so I wasn't supposed to be there, but I was supposed to be monitoring a picket line down the street, which was a diversion to divert the police while the sit-in got going. But the picket line was arrested right away, and the other spotter and I went down to see what was happening at Woolworth, and we ended up being part of the sit-in. Our mistake was we had finished exams at Tougaloo College. That's what an HBCU is, they're now called. It was just a colored college back then. So it was a good time for us to demonstrate, but we didn't check out what else was happening. And it was exam week at the high school, the white high school, just 2 or 3 blocks away from the town and the main street. And the seniors with good grades could go get lunch in town. And we didn't have the fast food joints back then. And except they couldn't get lunch because we were sitting at the counter, and so the management had closed it. So they were not happy. And as high school boys will do, somebody said something ugly to you, the next one wanted to outdo them with something uglier. And the violence actually got started by a former cop who had left the service, the police force, because he was a little bit too violent. And if one hit you, somebody else would. Now, the women got it the easiest, whether you were black or white. It was the guys that really got roughed up. And I'll say that is the most integrated sit-in that took place in the history of the sit-ins. The guy, he may look white, but he is a Native American tribal member. I'm white, and Ann Moody, my classmate, is black. So we were truly integrated. And I think it's the most widely used photo of any sit-in. The main story to me is the photographer. He had graduated from the same high school as the kids in the mob. He knew a lot of them. I'd say he dated their older sisters. And one guy, the one with the cigarette, lived 3 doors down the street from him. So when he came in, his sympathies were with the folks he knew. He got permission to stand on the lunch counter. He was up there for 3 hours, and by the time it was over, the store was closed and we got out. His sympathies had shifted to the demonstrators. Wow. And I say that is the power of Gandhian nonviolence. Now that night, when pictures appeared in the local paper, a kid at a rival white high school saw it, and his heart was changed. And I say that's the power of the press. What I learned from that, you must never forget the power of the press. That picture went worldwide. It was colorized on the front page of the Paris Match. That was the most important paper in Europe. That's like saying above the centerfold in the New York Times, back when newspapers were really big. So it was above the centerfold on the Paris Match in color. And to me, the photographers in any of the press, actually, cameramen for the TV stations and all, they are in as much danger as the demonstrators. If stuff starts, often they're attacked first to keep the story from going worldwide or even community-wide. And when stuff starts flying, they are as much in the line of fire as the demonstrators. So we must always remember the power of the press and respect the press.
I would love to talk about how history and current social events have affected our lives. I'd like to start with you, Joan. What issues did you see during the civil rights movement, and how do they compare to the movements today?
Well, back in our day, the law required segregation. My generation got rid of the laws. The Civil Rights Act of 64. So the segregation in public places became illegal. And now we still have all this racism and discrimination against people, but not just on the color of their skin, on the language they speak at home, their religion. We see economic disparities as an issue. We see food deserts, where there's no grocery stores as an issue. We see so many more, well, immigration, that's right up there now too. We see so many more issues. We've broadened our perspective. from just the color of your skin. So I would say we started it, but it's blossomed into many other varieties, and it's up to the younger generation to take care of that.
I'm glad you
We
said
can
that,
have you
Joan,
back.
because I've heard you say that so many times. And I just want to say that I'm like so excited to be on this panel with you.
Oh, thank you.
As we're picking up the baton. But yeah, no, like Joan is absolutely right. You know, there was a shift and they already paved the way by changing some laws to desegregate and get us all in the room. The reality for all of us here is that had that not happened, we would not be sitting in the same room together, right? So now we have to
Even virtually, we wouldn't
or even
be.
virtually, exactly. So now we have to think about, okay, how do we, the biases are still here. Some of these problems that are institutional, systemic problems are still here. So it's up to us now to start thinking about how do we eradicate it.
Yeah, I think the shift in the conversation has happened from a conversation about equality to a conversation more about equity. You know, segregation is no longer a thing. No one is gonna stop me from walking into a restaurant because I'm black, but that's equality. When I think about when I think about the equity of that, am I treated the same way as my white counterpart at that restaurant? Will a job hire me for or promote me for the same role and things like that? That's when you get into the conversation about equity, and I believe the baton that we're picking up is the equity baton,
Right.
because you have already, the Jones of the world, the people who have really, laid the foundation in the civil rights movement. They have solved the equality issue, and I know that may not sound right, but I differentiate equality and equity, pretty distinctly, and they really put a bat to the equality problem. They really did. Now it's our time to put the bat to the equity problem.
Right.
I may borrow your analysis in speaking.
So what happened to make us start having these conversations? There has always been a notion of keeping professional and personal separate, and I think right now we're seeing a lot of bleed between the two. And what has inspired that change, and what conversations are we having because of it?
So Joan said it. Never forget the power of the press. I just think the press has changed from being a paper that you get to being on your phone and being with you everywhere that you walk and everywhere that you go. The power of the press still exists. The power of information and knowledge is, the idea that literally the entire knowledge of the world is in my pocket right now, is beautiful and scary at the same time. I feel like the level of violence and the way that things were happening back in the civil rights movement, had Twitter and Instagram existed, the whole world would have been, protesting for what's happening in America, and we're seeing that right now. There were protests in the streets in Paris and in Dubai and for what happened to George Floyd in America, because it was now available for everyone to see. And I don't think the narrative has changed. I just think the ability to access that detail is more frequent.
Right. Technology did push that forward. And I would even go back further, right? Like to Cameron's point, 2020 was a pivotal moment, but we have been seeing this. Like I was protesting here in 2013 for the very same reasons that I was protesting in 2020. And the biggest shift in turnout and the biggest, hey, am I on? Oh, you're gonna have to fix this mic. The biggest difference was that technology, was that access, right? Because a lot of people did not understand what was going on, didn't really believe why this was so urgent. Why is it so necessary that we get rid of things like police brutality?
Trayvon Martin happened in
2013.
Yeah. So Black Lives Matter started because of the Trayvon Martin killing. Is everybody aware of Trayvon Martin? Is that okay? That's when Black Lives Matter started. That was 7 years ago now, almost 8 years ago. Nobody was in the streets protesting about Black Lives Matter until last year. Why?
I was, bro.
What I mean is on a global scale. You know,
On a global scale, absolutely.
So where's the conversation been for the last 7 years? And that's kind of the thing. And so many other things have happened. There's so many names that we can rattle off the top of our head. Breonna Taylor, Trayvon Martin, George Floyd, whoever you want to mention. These things have been happening for years, but now it's finally getting the attention it needs. And the beautiful thing, and I think the thing that is going to actually drive the success of this, is that it's not being brought to attention by black people. It's being brought to attention by all people, which is why things in the civil rights movement changed so much, because I get to look at what I look at as a beautiful picture. Is although there are violent things happening, it's a horrific moment in Joan's life and in the lives of others that were sitting there, but that's a beautiful moment to me because I can't be here without it. And it took people from other races, it took people being advocates and understanding the difference of simple right and wrong and saying, no, I'm gonna stand for something different, not looking like me, and change happened.
Well, I want to tell a little story, if I may.
Sure, go ahead.
The song "We Shall Overcome," based on church music, was the anthem of the civil rights movement. And you always stood and crossed arms and held hands when you sang it. Now people sing it, but they don't stand. And 2 or 3 times I've been on my feet, this old white lady, once in Mississippi in the very front of the crowd. I was on my feet as soon as it started, and gradually other people stood up. You know, it's disrespectful to be sitting down when you sing "We Shall Overcome." And then 2 or 3 years ago, well, maybe 3 now, I was with a group of folks and ladies of a certain color, not mine, in South Africa. And down in Cape Town, we had a morning of service, and I was with a group that went to an elementary school in an impoverished area. My working days were all in an elementary school, so I picked that one. And I think 3 or 4 of us were in a classroom full of 4th or 5th graders. I mean, I think double classes. And at the end of things, we talked about, you know, what we did back in the States, and we, you know, a Q&A thing, and then we had our closing remarks. And I said, back in the days of our civil rights movement, we had a song, "We Shall Overcome." I was planning to go on and say, whatever difficulty you face in life, tell yourself those 3 words and things will get better. I didn't get to say that closing part. The teacher, a rather rotund older gentleman, cut me off and said, "Oh, back in our apartheid demonstrations, we used to sing that song. Class, let's all sing it together." So, you know, 55 or so years after I was singing it in the Deep South, I was singing it with a packed classroom of students in an elementary school in Cape Town, South Africa. And it like brought tears to my eyes, almost bringing tears now, just telling about it. So you start something, you don't know how far it's going to go. The press helps it. The internet helps it. You know, Facebook helps it, but it'll get there. Just do good.
I love that. And I think we came across an important point that these movements affect all people and they're for all people. So where do we go from there, and what do we do about it? What does it look like to engage diversity and inclusion and reconciliation as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, okay. Me and Karen are actually friends, so if we argue up here, don't worry about it. You know, and Joan, did you want to take this one first? I don't want to step on your toes again.
No, I want to hear what you got to say.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
I've had
Yes,
a
ma'am.
lot to say. Your turn.
You know, when we talk about where we go from here, I'm going to vent a little bit. I am personally tired of, and this is to this point, right? I'm tired of seeing these basically racially segregated events for us to talk to each other about our own problems. I'm tired of going to all black events about diversity and me telling a bunch of black people about how it's harder in the workplace for them and and what equity and equality is. I'm tired of seeing all Hispanic events and all white events and any of that. It's events like these. It is moments like this where we get to have our part in this photo, right? Maybe not with the violence, maybe not with the struggle, but with the coming together, the bringing together of people. I think that is so important, and that's where we go. If I vent to Karen about what I'm dealing with in the workplace, she's like, you're preaching to the choir. But if I vent to anyone in this corner over here, which none of you all look like me, right? You know, then at least what you can do is empathize and say, wow, I didn't realize that was your struggle, and I will make sure I never make that mistake with someone else. And same vice versa. I think we need to have a level of reality and level setting with each other. We need to have a level of honesty with each other. I love it when a white person asks me something that sounds stereotypical about black people so that we can at least have the conversation. Or because they honestly don't know. What they're saying is not meant to offend. It's not meant to hurt. And I'm tired of people of color in particular, and I love it. I love people of color. I don't mean I'm tired of them. I'm saying I'm tired of us looking for offense in everything. We have to stop doing that, and same with our white counterparts. We have to stop looking for ways to be offended and ways to call each other wrong and understand that we need open communication, and that's how we can learn, ask questions, and change. That's where we go.
I love that. I love that. I will add to that, though, that if you do know that something is wrong and you probably shouldn't say it, don't say it. I will put that out there. But I'm gonna add to this by bringing it to the workplace, right? Because I think that also is a part of the conversation. And let's talk about that. We're at RevRoad, and a lot of you work at companies, right? So, or are building companies. We have to take everything that Cameron just said, take everything that Joan said about advocacy and working together, and actually make a real commitment within our companies to strategize and make that change happen, right? So what does that look like? That means you have to continue these type of uncomfortable conversations. You have to continue to actually build an actual company strategy that is not just about bringing diverse voices into the workplace.
But what's point A? Where does the start, especially for companies that are just getting off the ground, where do you absolutely start?
Point A is you bring everybody into your company so that you actually can have those conversations. You diversify your friend group, frankly, right? Like a lot of us, we get to have fantastic conversations, but there are different conversations I have with my husband, who is a white man, right? So my household and the conversations that I have at home are very different. We get to have these type of conversations. So you got to change your friend group. You have to diversify your company, but you have to go further than that. You have to actually talk about building that equity that you mentioned. You have to talk about, having a real change to ensure that everybody who is at your company feels like they belong there, right?
I'm really sorry. And Joan, I'm not trying to take away from you. I want to ask questions because I want to be fair to the audience that we have. The audience that we have may be a group of white men, 3 people, and all they can afford is those 3 people in their company, and that's how they're going to kick off their brand and how they're going to kick off their venture. How do they get involved in the fight? How do they think about equality and equity and things like that? Because it's not about hiring the next person of color, because they're not going to hire somebody for a year. Does that mean they're counted out? Does that mean they've done something wrong? Where's the starting point?
Not at all, right? I think to your point, right? If your team, when you're thinking about building your team, think about all the resources that you have available. There are so many different choices. There are so many different organizations, so that from the get-go, your team can be diverse. But if you don't have that, right, to your point, still go out there in the community and diversify your friend group so that you can have those different conversations. You brought up the internet earlier, right? So there are so many different fantastic resources. Like the Utah Black Chamber, we've done a fantastic job at hosting conversations about diversity and inclusion, about social change, right? So become a part of those conversations when you can't, change your workforce.
Yeah, I would say, to me, and this doesn't directly answer the question, but the bottom line on it all is that the world's religions teach us that we are created in the image of the Almighty. Nowhere does it ever say that the Almighty is black or white or purple, male or female. In fact, the word Allah is gender neutral. It doesn't say what the native language of the Almighty is. It doesn't, a lot of these things that we talk about, discrimination on this basis or that basis, the Almighty is not defined in the same terms that we're talking about our society. And so when I'm meeting you, you are as much created in the image of the Almighty as I am. And if you are going to down the inner, if I'm going to put you down because you're black, sir, I'm putting down the Almighty. And that could lead me to an uncomfortable place in the afterlife. So we really need to remember that everybody is in the image of the Almighty. Everybody is equal in the eyes of God. Amen. Pass the gravy.
Amen. Now, can I offer just a slightly different perspective on this?
Sure.
Again?
All right, actually, I'll shut up. Never mind. I'll apologize.
No, go ahead. You always have a different take on something you want to say.
I just mean that, when I think about it from a business perspective, most of the people in the room are entrepreneurs. Myself and Karen are entrepreneurs as well. When I think about it from that perspective, I think about things, whether I'm talking about diversity, whether I'm talking about the food I'm going to eat, I think about it from a bottom line perspective. And when you look at your bottom line and you look at the pitch for yourselves for diversity and inclusion, it is statistically 40% more likely that you'll be a successful company if you have a diverse board of directors and a diverse team. So from a bottom line perspective, just from a financial perspective, you're better off having diversity on your team. So when you look at your 2 or 3 person team and you're looking for that next board member, when you're looking for that next vice president or something like that, really consider looking outside of outside of your standard box and going out to a diverse candidate, whether that be female, black, Hispanic, whatever, because they're going to bring a perspective that you didn't have and open you up to an audience that you couldn't have gotten to in general. And there's business grants. There are there's minority suppliers and things like that where you can actually generate significant revenue from just having more diversity on your team. It's a reality.
I see where you were trying to get me to go. Okay. I will say to Cameron's point.
Again? No, I'm joking.
But he's absolutely right, because if you're in the business of building a business and at some point you're going to want to take that business public, right? When you go to NASDAQ, that's going to be what they expect from you. They are looking for your boards to be diverse, right? They're looking for your executive teams to be diverse. They are looking for your companies to have a particular strategy. You don't have to know it all, but the resources are here and they're available to help you navigate that so that you don't feel like you're going through it all by yourself.
We've talked a little bit about fluency and code switches, and within diverse groups, there are different titles given to people or titles that they associate with, right? And it can be an overwhelming task to understand who prefers which title and when to use which title and so forth. Is there a correct way to ask someone which term or title they prefer, and how do you go about, and how does it affect our progress as a people, being able to embrace and understand all titles?
Are you talking about pronouns?
Pronouns, titles, Black, African American, so forth.
Okay, you looked at me. Honestly, I think the best example I've seen on how to ensure that you do, I mean, you just ask. Like, Cameron and I are super open. If you don't know that person's pronoun, hey, just ask them. Like, he just said that, just ask. I'm not going to be offended if you ask me. I'd rather that you ask me than, use the wrong pronoun. So the best example I've seen with the University of Utah, and this is just how companies do it, is they're just put it out there, put out a feeler, or have people put it in their email signature or in their company profile. And that way, when you're talking to that person, you know how to address them. It also gets rid of that awkwardness of, I don't know how to address you, right? As we're thinking about pronouns. And I mean, maybe you have a better idea on race, but we might never want to assume. I get questions from people. My sister is half white, and she's very fair, right? And so, but she owns the fact that she's half Black. And she wouldn't appreciate anybody making the assumption that, oh, you're white because of how you look, because she's very proud of her identity. So I say just ask, I don't see anything wrong with that.
Yeah, I'm gonna be a realist for a second. Honestly, when it comes to race, I think it's appropriate to say how would you like me to identify with you, or I think that's okay. I will be honest and say, look, I'm the director of diversity for Domo, so this hopefully doesn't take my job. But I am personally extremely uncomfortable with the conversation around pronouns from the perspective of asking. How do you ask a woman who identifies as a man if she's male or if she wants to be him or her or whatever, or a man who identifies as a woman? How do you ask without offending? And I don't know the answer to that.
You just say, what are your preferred pronouns? And then you leave it up to them.
But I feel like if you do that, the only way to do that appropriately is to ask that question to every single person you meet. Because if you single out a person and ask about their specific pronoun, there's obviously confusion, which could affect. Like if somebody asked me, like, hey, do you prefer him or her? And I'd be like, what? Like, isn't it obvious? So I want to make sure that, that is not an offensive place. And I say that to be a member of the audience as well, to ask that question as the audience would ask. Because for me, it's not something I totally understand as of yet how to appropriately ask that question unless you just ask everyone.
Joan, do you have anything you would like to add?
Oh, you could just say, hey, you, and be done with it. But, I'm not into it.
Somebody please tweet that. Just say, hey,
Just
you.
say, hey, you. Just say, hey, you. I think that. There's a question. Can we get a microphone?
Well, while we're getting it, I got a poster in Mississippi that said, y'all means all. It's just that simple. And I think that's relevant. Y'all, that's everybody.
Love it.
Gay, straight, whatever.
So regarding the pronouns, just kind of wondering why we wouldn't consider hiring the best qualified for the position in the company rather than having to single out race. Wouldn't that be considered racist?
So I'll answer this one. So no, emphatically no, right? It's not about when you're hiring for the best, what would be racist or what would be I'm not even sure the right way to put it, but the way that would go wrong is if your pool of the best is a bunch of white guys. how could it possibly be that they are the only ones that can be considered the best? And when you don't look outside of that pot, that's what's racist. That's what is inequitable. That is when you as a company will start to fail because you're not actually looking for the best of the best. You're declaring where you think it is.
I think that's a really important conversation that we have seen rise to the surface in 2020 and continued into this year. What kind of conversations are you guys having within your companies about diversity and inclusion and the culture of a workplace in general?
We're talking strategy, right? So in the conversations that I have, we're moving, yes, we're talking about hiring, yes, we're talking about retention, but we're also talking about how those type of diverse voices impact the way that your company looks externally. So that's everything from how your brand looks, to the creative that you put out there, to the markets that you market to, right? Going back to revenue, if you're only going to be able to tap into the resources that are right in front of you if your team only sees right in front of them. So if you have a diverse team, they might be able to help you amplify whatever campaign you're working on. They might be able to help you hire individuals who are going to be a part of your creative so that your brand looks inclusive of all people. A really good example that I'm working on with some companies and I always reference is Victoria's Secret. And they were in a huge kind of embarrassing moment because they were called out because they are not body inclusive and they were not diverse. And it was not representative of the population, right? So the population in the United States is very, very diverse. And so ideally, if you can, you'd want your company to represent the population, right? And that's also going to help you sell to the right group of people. So with Victoria's Secret, to make the long story short, they refused to do that. And then Savage Fenty came in and they completely took over because they wanted to make sure that women and men who have, who are veterans are included. They wanted women and men with disabilities to be included in their brands. They wanted to celebrate women and men of all different sizes and shapes and all colors, all races. So if at the end of the day, that's the kind of conversation that I want to have, right? I want to make sure that every brand has the tools they need to be representative of the communities that they reside in.
Brilliant.
Well, I was gonna, Joan.
Oh, let Joan go?
No,
Joan, no?
I'll pass.
Okay, beautiful.
I agree with Karen. We're having the conversations around strategy, intentionality, and really what's our why, right? Like I think every company needs to start with their why for the diversity conversation. And inside our walls, I always tell people diversity has never been our goal, right? That's not the goal that we have as an organization. Really, we want to create an inclusive and equitable place for people to be, and that's what the reality is. Diversity a lot of times is based on the data with the numbers that you have in the state. If you're a 3-person company and you hire a black guy, you have one of the most diverse companies in the state. That's the reality. So I don't look at it from that perspective, but when you are a larger company and you hire a cohort of people, for example, maybe you go to HBCUs and recruit at the HBCU, which is one thing that we're doing at Domo. Well, you have to be prepared to receive that level of diversity company-wide, not just go after it, which is why I say diversity has never been really the goal. And being intentional is not racist. It is intentional. Right? Like you're going to an HBCU is not saying, oh, I'm being, I'm only hiring black people. That's not what that means. That means that there's an intentionality, understanding that this is a group that you want to target, just like it would be if you went to the Hispanic Tech Conference, just like it would be if you went to a NSBE conference or something like that, or Afrotech or whatever, or the Women's Tech Council, and you hire from members of that, right? Like, are you being racist? Are you being sexist? Or are you being intentional, right?
Well, make sure you go to my HBCU, Tougaloo College in Mississippi, and look for the deltas.
Oh, okay.
Amen. Delta.
Yes. So what conversation do you wish you could have, or are you going to have and plan on having with everyone within your organization or within your network and your friend group?
About what?
Diversity
Oh,
and
okay.
inclusion, yes.
I'm like, well, can we make
Like
$1 million?
in general. No, about diversity and inclusion.
No, I think the biggest conversation that I have with my friend group, which is like really diverse, right? We live in Utah and it's majority white, but there's Latino, there's Asians, like everyone. The biggest conversations that we have is we just talk about the struggles that we all feel. And then we talk about how do we actually go out into our communities and into our companies and make the changes that we want to see. You know, we are our biggest friends. At the end of the day, this is all about social change. And so we can learn from one another. We can invite to, I'm forgetting the gentleman's name, but he presented earlier. Expand your network. Seth, hey, thank you. Expand your network and build it so that you hear different voices and you take from all those people and you apply the good things in your, your friend group, at work. Like you just have to kind of do that. So we talk about real things. We talk about real topics. We learn from each other and then we apply it.
I really think open communication is the key. I mentioned that before, like creating a comfortable place for all people to be open. And, the conversations that I wish I could have with everybody is that diversity doesn't exclude the white male or the white female or something. Like when you think about, yes, ma'am, when you think about inclusion and diversity and everything else, the white Mormon male is just as much part of that conversation as the black guy from Chicago. Right, and your opinions and views are just as important as mine, and I think that gets lost a lot of oftentimes when diversity is such a heavy topic, and people feel excluded in that circumstance. And I'd like to tell people that the conversations around diversity are more about empathy than they are about someone taking your job or something like that. It's about understanding the plight of others. Look, the people in this room, although majority white, there is diversity amongst who you are, where you've come from, what religion you are. Did you leave the Mormon church? Are you still in the Mormon church? Do you have 2 right feet? Whatever it is, diversity covers all things. And just because you look a certain way doesn't take away from that diversity. That's the conversation I want people to really understand, and understanding, why it's a difficulty for me being a black man in Utah is more important that you understand that from me, if you're talking specifically to me, than it is for you to understand that, a company has an intentionality of hiring more people of color, right? That's what we have to get to.
Well, not being in the workplace, I can't speak to, that sort of thing. But I think in my neighborhood and the groups that I belong to, we are fairly diverse already. But I think it's just bloom where you're planted, act when the moment calls you. And if there's some issue about something, address it then or lead by example.
So, Joan, I'd like to start with you for this next question. What can the white community be doing to get involved and to be supportive?
Well, they can join in with whatever is happening when welcomed, and not try to tell folks what to do who are dealing with the problem, which became a problem in the civil rights movement of white Northerners coming down trying to tell the local folks how to do things, and that caused the big split. But join in where you're welcomed and follow the lead of the folks who are the leaders and most affected by the issue. And I also say that for everybody on the front line, somebody has to have their back. Both groups are important, and they equally important and about equal numbers. For everybody on the front line, there's got to be somebody who's driving the cars, getting the bail money together, cooking the meals, just watching what's happening and reporting, making the phone calls, all that type of thing. So I'd say that's what you can do, but don't try to tell the folks who are most directly affected and in the leadership roles a better way to do it. If they ask your opinion on something, you can give it, but don't try to take over.
Yeah, and I just like to frame the question slightly differently, just
Sure,
because, not every white person wants to be on the front line of the issues. Just like I don't want to be on the front line of every single, social justice issue either. I don't necessarily want to be on the front line of every black issue, right? It's not about being on the front line. It's really about not being part of the problem. Like how, in the question that
I like
have,
that.
the question that I have is, thank you, Joan, is how do we help white people and anybody to not be a part of the problem and not further go forward with the problem and not necessarily tell them that they have to be frontliners, because I don't want to be in the Army. I don't. I didn't sign up to go to war. I don't want to be on the front line. I want to sit behind a desk and code and come up with diversity plans, right? But these are all business people in this room. They are business first. How do I grow my company? How do I gain more revenue? How do I become EBITDA positive, right? They're not going out and saying, let me go march and say Black Lives Matter. But how do they not become a part of the problem?
Yeah, I would add to your point, the way that you can become not a part of the problem is you need to not leave this conversation in this room, but take it with you and become educated about what continues to happen in the world around you and what is affecting the people who do not look like you, right? So we have the tools now to always be educated. We have the people in our communities, we have the organizations in our communities to always understand what is going on. And we would do a disservice to ourselves if we don't actually take the time outside of these wonderful conversations to learn more about what's happening and become involved simply by just understanding the history and the change that's going on, and then taking it back to our work or our families, taking it home and saying, I'm going to apply these wonderful things that I've learned to be more inclusive, to ensure that everybody feels safe. And that's how I contribute to social justice and racial justice. So make sure you don't leave the conversation, in this panel. Take it home. Continue to educate yourself.
And can I just, this is a question for both Joan and Karen, and I'm sorry, I know I'm not the question asker.
No, go ahead.
I'm just curious, like, when we think about someone else, right, and being in someone else's shoes, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't, I'm really asking the question, why as a white person, when you weren't, you weren't housing slaves, you're not racist, you're not saying the N-word in your home or whatever, like, why should you feel a sense of responsibility in this issue? I'm very curious what the mindset would be on that. I mean, I have my own opinion, but I'm curious what you all are.
Joan, take it away.
Oh, wow. Well, you may not have been part of the problem that created the situation we have today, but, historically, but you have a responsibility always to make the world a better place. And that's the problem we have here, is racism in this country at this time. And so everybody has an obligation to try to change it. And since it was promoted by European types right from the get-go, I think we have a little bit more of a responsibility to do something about it. Not
She
a very
said
good
it
answer,
best.
but
And not to play devil's advocate, but me being from Chicago,
God
There's
have mercy on your
700 deaths a year from gang violence. Why don't I feel some extreme sense of responsibility there, where I'm asking other people to feel some level of responsibility for my plight?
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point that I see all the time, right? It, you should feel responsible, right? Because the lives of those around us, like we operate as a human race. Jane Elliott says this all the time. We are all a part of a human race. That means that we need to move as a collective to ensure that we can not only progress, and we can talk about economically, we could talk about socially, but together, if we don't move as a collective, we're going to be wiped out. Things are going to continue to be bad for other people. So we just have to be good neighbors. And part of being a good neighbor requires you, and I'm a woman of faith, but so that's what informs how I move. It requires you to move, I don't want to say this, but to move like Jesus would want you to, right? Like it requires you to be a kind person. It requires you to stand up against the injustices that you see, regardless of where it's happening or the racial lines or the gender lines. It just requires you to be good and be kind to your neighbor. And when we look at that, we will absolutely move as a collective, because we're looking at each other from the sense of you are just as important as I am, and your life matters just as much as my life matters. So that's, I think, the biggest takeaway. Regardless of what it is, what the problem is, if we operate with that mindset, we'll be better as a society.
At this time, I would like to open it up for audience questions. So if you have a question, raise your hand. We have some mic runners. They will run a mic to you. Please do not touch the microphone. They will hold it in front of you, and then you can ask your question.
Yeah, thank you very much for being here today. I really appreciate it. You know, I like to think about differences between safe spaces and brave spaces, and you guys have created a brave space here today, so I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, a question that I have, by building diversity into your business model, how does that impact your ability to participate in community or to work with clients overall?
I think it significantly expands it. And sorry, when I look in this direction, I have to close one eye. It's computer problems, coding too much. But no, I think it significantly expands it, right? Because now you've opened yourself up to a new pool of clients that you would have never had prior. Or, you know, if you have a product that you're selling, you know, and you're working with the Black Chamber of Commerce, well, now there's a whole community of people that now know about your product that wouldn't have known about it before. From a bottom line perspective, it enhances your business tenfold. With the more you get diverse, the more pools of people that you can work with.
This question comes from Megan online. What are some resources you'd recommend to educate ourselves about this after leaving this meeting?
If you go online, well, I love Instagram. So if you love Instagram or you like TikTok, there's a fantastic account called So You Want to Talk About, just follow it, right? That's a resource. Again, the Utah Black Chamber, we have a fantastic webinar lineup. So if you're ever looking to learn more about diversity and inclusion, you know, things that affect the social movement, all of those things, you can follow us. But on a more regular basis, if you don't have time for a webinar, I think that that's a fantastic resource to get started. And they talk about multiple types of topics, like oppression. What is the Black Lives Matter movement? What kind of bills are at play right now? And, you know, so that you can become educated about those and you can, you know, participate in that type of activism from your home, or if you so choose to, actually participate with the community around you.
First off, thank you for coming. I really appreciate seeing you two again and also meeting Joan for the first time. But interesting question for you, maybe more of a PR question. Back last year, Domo had a billboard that said Black Lives Matter. And it was defaced to say All Lives Matter up in Draper. As many of us are entrepreneurs, own our own companies, and have a corporate entity, what do you believe is the corporate entity's responsibility to either join into activism or to get involved in political discussions?
Yeah, and so that billboard was defaced to say all life matter, which means that the person was illiterate, but whatever, you know. But, you know, to your question, I do think that it's not always necessarily the entity's job itself to be political activists and things like that. I think that when you talk about diversity and you talk about inclusion and equity and everything else, that is a decision that starts from the top down. And you know, in Domo's case with Josh James being the CEO, that was a top-down decision that said, you know, we are claiming that D&I is important to our organization. We're not only going to show it, we're going to put our money where our mouth is, and we're going to speak out loud in the way that we function. And to me, that is the secret sauce of a great leader and a great CEO and someone who is making a determination that this is going to happen from me on down and throughout my organization. That is where that decision comes from, not particularly the entity itself. I don't think that it's every single person's in this room's job to be out there and be a social activist and to hold up picket signs and things like that. I don't believe that that's true. What I believe is if that is something that you're passionate about and that's something that you believe in, then stand on what you actually believe.
Yeah, I've got a question. So I've grown up in this area for most of my life, right? Not the most diverse place in the world. I've lived in different parts of the country as well. But
it's actually rated the least diverse place in the country.
Yeah. But so now I'm here, and you talked about expanding and your circle, right? And so my question to you, and this is legitimate to both Karen and Cameron, will you guys be my friends?
That is so cute. Come to me afterwards. I'll give you my phone number and my email.
You can have my phone number and email. We're not friends yet. We'll get there. To me, friendship is a genuine thing, right? Like to me, it's not about I got to go get a black friend or anything like that. And I appreciate what I'm not making fun of you. What I'm saying is, it's not about that. There's a genuineness to it. It's about empathy. It's about understanding people. It's about understanding how people function. I don't want to be friends with everybody in the room. Y'all might have COVID, but I am open to being friends with anyone who is genuine towards me, and I'll be genuine towards you, and that I truly do mean. Joan, will you be his friend, by the way?
Remotely. I haven't seen him yet.
All right, so is that all? All right, so I got a quick question. Playing off this last one, right? Utah is one of the least diverse places, and I've heard a sense of fatigue among the black community of having to always be the spokesman for all black people everywhere to all of their white friends. How do we be sensitive? As you know, one of the comments we've gotten is go have those uncomfortable conversations. How do we be sensitive to that sense of fatigue, which I'm sure exists?
I think that a huge part of it is, well, first of all, maybe have a lot of different friends, and then that way we're not just asking the same question to that one friend. But no, I like, aside from that joke, but like it's so real, right? A huge part of it is you can just ask, like when people come to me and I feel uncomfortable or I might not want to talk about that topic, I just say, hey, like right now this is very difficult to deal with. I know for me during George Floyd, all of June was a very difficult season for me. And I just kept referring my friends to resources before we had a conversation, because I was going through a grieving moment and I needed to cope with that. So my best advice to you is what I personally tell my friends, which is, hey, do your research. If you have a question, you can't find it on the internet, you can't find it in a book, come to me. I'm happy to have the conversation. But just be mindful of like what my space is, how I'm feeling, and just be respectful. If I don't have time to talk about it, we'll retouch on that later.
And I'll just go back to being genuine. Honestly, it is really hard to get upset with somebody who has a genuine question or thought or opinion or something like that, whether it's good or bad. Like, you know, just be genuine and understand that exactly what you just said, you can say that to them and say, look, I understand that you don't speak for all black people in the world. I have a question. If now isn't the time, let's just enjoy what we're doing right now, and you know, whatever activity we're engaged in, whatever, or let's change the topic. But if you're open to it, can I ask this question? You know.
Hi, I have a quick question. So it seems like we're in a little bit of a catch-22 when we put a job application or we a notice for a job. We get very little diversity applying. In fact, we get no diversity applying. And so the opportunity to increase that applicant pool, we do pretty good from a male and a female standpoint. But just from a Utah State standpoint, you mentioned it's one of the least diverse. What can we do to increase the attractiveness, I guess, of the state to where this is a desirable place to come grow?
So let me be very clear. Utah is not one of the least diverse states. Salt Lake City is ranked 165 amongst 500 cities that were ranked. Provo and Orem are ranked the two least diverse cities. It's not Utah as a state, it's Provo and Orem. To your point, there's not a lot of diversity in the application pool that you have. Two things that I'll say on this, and RevU, please don't kick me out for saying this. One is, I think that there probably can be some help from this organization into helping you to get your job applications out to a more diverse group of people, whether that be in-state people that live here in Utah, whether that be to out-of-state organizations or whatever it is that can help, you know, move your applications out there. I really think that could be the 13th service that you all provide right there, right?
Yeah, I'd like to say that, you know, when you're reaching outside the state, they're pointing out to folks that, you know, the fantastic scenery Utah is my favorite place. You know, if I was going to tell folks to go to some place in the U.S., which I get asked, go to Utah and start from there because of the beauty of the place. Good food, you can get all sorts of things. I mean, how many places have Icelandic festivals? Y'all do. And so there's the good food, there's an ethnic mix, albeit predominantly European by a long shot, but and Salt Lake City is a major hub for transfer points if you're flying anywhere in the world. A lot of it goes through Salt Lake. So you've got a lot of good things to sell on, and be sure you bring them up when you're going outside the state looking for someone.
Yeah, and I would also say just going back to community outreach. There are so many fantastic resources that can right now help you as you try to diversify, right? There's the Sorensen Impact Center. There's the Women Business Center. There's the Utah Black Chamber. There's the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Latino
Living
Expo.
Color Utah.
Yes, Living Color Utah, right? So as you think about that, all of those places, like our job and our investment is in the professional advancement of people of color. And so we just want to know, like, we might not know about you, but if you come to us, we'd be more than happy to help connect you or connect those jobs to the people in our communities that are looking for them. And to Joan's point, you know, when you're trying to bring people in, you want to tell that story of how beautiful Utah is, but you also want to tell the story of there's a community here for you that is available for you that you will identify with. And so you'll want to have those type of resources so you can introduce them to the community that is here for them.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you guys so much. And this question is kind of towards the people of color in Utah. And playing off the other gentleman's question over there, how can us, I guess, as people of color, because there's not many of us, we kind of have to be those social activists all the time. Right. We get asked lots and lots of questions. Right. So how can we better educate, I guess, love the ignorance that does come? And second question, this one's for Mr. Cameron. Also, what do you believe about, this one's more of a personal question, but what do you believe about dreadlocks and other things inside like the workplace community?
You should have asked me that second question. I'm working on a hair bill. But that's nor here nor there. Go ahead and answer the second question. You go first, because I'm still pondering on the first one.
So wait, repeat the first one, because
I think the first one is
the people of color. So are you asking how do we educate ourselves, or how do we help to educate our white counterparts?
Sort of both, because we both need to educate ourselves. There's always more we can learn, but also dealing with a lot of the ignorance and things that come with not understanding our culture. How can we better educate others?
Yeah, and I think one is, I think educating ourselves is super important. That's one thing. But when you're trying to educate someone else, like where it's their ignorance or whatever, that's where, I mean, honestly, you just take a stand. Like anytime you, especially as a person of color, anytime you check somebody and let them know, like, hey, you can't say that, or they make that mistake like once, right? You know, that is one way to really educate somebody, is to speak from a place of knowledge. And, you know, I won't pretend to have that question all the way thought through. You know, I get asked questions all the time, particularly given my role. And in some ways, I feel responsible to answer. So maybe I'm not the best person to ask on that one. You know, I'll give it to Karen and Joan on that. But on the question about the dreads, we'll get to that one in a second, because I have a lot to say on that.
Here's my opinion, right? Like, your hair is a part of your identity. It is. And the reality for us is, you know, there are a lot of biases that come with black hair. But our job is, you know, as D&I professionals, in just people in society, like activists, like and political lobbyists like myself, is to ensure that you can bring your whole self to work. And part of that is ensuring that your hair is not you're not discriminated against because of how you look. And that includes your hair. So, yeah, be your full self. Be your full self and walk in that. I said that right at the beginning. You know, dreads are beautiful. There's a fantastic historical context with that. If people have questions about it, I would bring that up and say, look, this is the heritage. This is the story behind it. And you know, walk in that. And if a company doesn't want you for that, then maybe they're not the best company that's going to look at you or want to work with you and see you just for the value that you bring to them and to their team.
Well, folks used to be real down on afros. I mean, well, some folks did, white folks. But, and I say the dreads are the new fros, but folks always got to find something to fuss about. And that's just a convenient thing. I think dreads are, you know, good looking, but that's just me. Some folks are down on bandanas, but I wear one all the time. Doesn't mean I'm a redneck, but you know, or I have a do-rag, but it's just my style. Yes, sir.
We love your style, Joan, by the way. We do love your style.
This is true.
You know, my opinion on it is, you know, frankly, I mentioned this before. There's a line that has to be drawn between being yourself and being professional, right? The way that your hair is right now, to me, is very professional. There's nothing that I would complain about, you know, and I'm saying that as a black man. I don't know if that's fair or not. But, you know, we have to understand that stereotypes do exist. The way people look at us. Look, at the end of the day, if I walk into a room with a do-rag on, like Joan can maybe wear a do-rag. If I wear a do-rag, I am going to assume that someone else is going to look at me and have the perception that that I'm less than professional, or, you know, potentially aggressive, or whatever it is. Stereotypes do exist. We as black people have them too, right? About other black people, to
and
be
white
fair,
folks.
and white folks, and all people.
Folks.
But I don't think that hair should be a place that you can discriminate. There, from a cultural perspective, you know, if we look at the Native American community, there are some Native American, you know, cultures that where the men wear a long ponytail and you don't cut your hair. how dare us say that we're not going to hire that person because they don't look professional or whatever. The professional dress for a lot of the Polynesian cultures might be, a man wearing, what can do it to others might look like a skirt or whatever you would call it. I don't even know the proper name, so forgive me if lava you said. Yeah, so but that for that culture is dressing nice and dressing professionally. How dare us say that it's not? That to me is not where the line gets drawn on professionalism and things like that. But as Karen said, she's working on a hair bill. I know that they are trying to put discrimination on hair as one of the equal opportunity things where you cannot discriminate against that. So there's a lot of things happening there. So no, I don't believe that you can discriminate on hair, but I do believe that there is a way to be yourself but maintain your look professionally. I do think that is an important factor.
And why are Scottish people only supposed to wear skirts, the men, when they got a bagpipe they're blowing on? Historically, that was the way folks dressed without the bagpipe.
One more question from online. Scott asks, do you have a Twitter or IG account we can follow, or who else would you recommend we follow?
You can follow me at
IG Queen right here.
Okay. And I was about to do my whole slate. You can follow me at krod_gold. And just stay in tune. I always do a breakdown of everything that's happening around us. I do a breakdown every day on my story. If you like to read, you might read, I read a lot of long form content on my IG. So you can follow that too. That's my same handle on Twitter.
Perfect. A few more questions. Kay, we'll go here, and then Darren in the back, and then we'll wrap it up.
All right, so I wanted to go back to what you're talking about with Victoria's Secret and Fenty, because Victoria's Secret was built on their brand. They were trying to sell sexy, and so that's what they marketed. And so trying to grow a brand, trying to market your company to more demographics, do you think it would be better to just show more diversity in your advertisement, so have different people so it's easier for them to see themselves with your product? Or would it be better to go out and figure out what advertising is appealing to different demographics?
Victoria's Secret is a huge brand, and they absolutely knew that all of us, right? All women like to feel sexy, right? That's their business that they're into. And so, if your model as a business is to get anyone to buy your product, we're like Cameron said earlier, this is about business. This is about the bottom line. I'm in the interest of making money because that's how my business is going to survive. So it shouldn't be something where only one group of people sees themselves in your product. If you change your advertisement so that everyone can see themselves utilizing your tools or, wearing whatever it is that you sell or using whatever it is that you sell, then people are going to just buy it because they're going to feel represented. They're going to feel like it belongs for them too. So I think that if you change your creative assets, that's going to go a long way, and it should be the right thing to do.
And to second that, and again, I mean no disrespect in what I'm about to say, but what Victoria's Secret was selling as sexy isn't what I see as sexy. What I find sexy looks a little bit different. And so, they're obviously not being inclusive of what all people find as, like you said, is their whole point was to, go after, to say that this is what sexy is. Well, that was what was sexy to some white dudes. That wasn't sexy to me. So, so that you gotta really think about it from that perspective. You have to really look at it from the perspective of how are different people going to perceive what I'm putting out there. And again, as Karen said, see themselves using what I'm delivering as a product or a service or vice versa. At Domo, we don't allow for just a bunch of white people and there's nothing wrong with white people. What I'm saying is that is the majority in Utah, which is why if we were in Africa, I would say a bunch of black people, so please take no offense. But you know, the point that I'm making is we as a product can't walk in a room and just ask white males that went to BYU what they think about the product. How does the orange look over there? Does the green button over there make you think that you should click it? I might look at that totally different. I might look at the phrasing in our marketing as offensive, whereas someone else might think it's just totally fine. That's the importance. That's why companies get in trouble. They'll say something in a commercial. Peloton did that. They put out a commercial, I believe, during Christmas, and it was determined that it was a very sexist commercial. Well, they must not have had a bunch of women in the room, along with the men that made that commercial, because somebody would have told them that, right? That's the power of having a diverse group. You can keep yourself out of a lot of trouble, keep money in your pocket, and put more money in it.
First, is that on? All right. Hey, first of all, thank you, Karen. Thank you, Cameron. Thank you, Joan. This has been awesome. We love having you here at RevRoad. I know we're going to clap for you in a little bit, but I think we should give them all another hand. And Bree would never do this on her own, so I'm going to do it. I would like to make a plug. Bree has been leading a wonderful new diversity and inclusion podcast that I'm going to ask her to tell us a little bit about when she finishes, along with John here at LaunchPod. So we're really excited to hear a little bit about that at the end. And then secondly, I have to tee this question up. So we have 41 companies here at RevRoad in our portfolio. 17 of them are women-founded or minority-founded and led. How do you recommend to any of those 41 companies that they get in touch specifically with the organizations that you talked about? Okay, and like, should they go to a meeting? I know they can follow on Instagram, but is there what can they do that's more active than just following?
Yeah, I think, to Cameron's point earlier, the best way to get involved, and you'll get access to all the different organizations. I promise I don't have COVID. The best way to get involved is follow Living Color Utah.
Follow Living Color Utah. Living Color Utah is basically the coming together of many of the diversity-led nonprofits in Utah. It's the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, it's the Black Chamber of Commerce, the LGBTQ plus Chamber of Commerce. It includes Equality Utah, Curly Me, which is an excellent program. Everybody's involved in kind of stepping with one leg and saying, hey, this, when we talk about diversity, it's not about black, white, Hispanic, whatever. It's about all people, from all backgrounds, and that's what Living Color Utah really goes after. So follow that, follow the chambers, follow the event schedules and things like that. That's another thing that Living Color Utah does, is it shows you all the different events that are upcoming, particularly those that are diverse in nature, and just get involved. I mean, truly, just I promise you, no one is going to look at you funny or turn you away if you show up at an event. They're going to be so happy you're there. And as a matter of fact, the majority of companies that are registered under the Black Chamber of Commerce are white companies, right? So never feel excluded.
I know we have one more online question. Can I get a mic to AJ, please?
This question comes from Bart, and it's directed towards Joan specifically. Joan, can you tell us anything about your son Loki's award-winning documentaries that document a little bit about your story?
Well, the name Loki's from the Norse god of mischief, and he lived up to it. He tricked me into that movie about the story of my life called An Ordinary Hero. He misled me on what it was going to be, but it really traces the history of the student civil rights movement of the 60s, but through my story. And he's gone on to make several more movies on racial issues, The Uncomfortable Truth about the history of institutional racism. I think it's Black, White, and Us, about white parents in Utah who adopted kids of color. and thinking, racism was dead, and found out it was alive and well. He's done one called After Selma about how voting rights have been eroded since the March on the Edmund Pettus Bridge and the passage of the 65 Voting Rights Act. And then I think one about the abolition of slavery in Utah, because, slavery, it was allowed. Maybe it still is in Utah, under the state constitution as a punishment for crimes, slavery and involuntary servitude, words taken straight from the U.S. Constitution. And he's got a few more in the can, and he's come out with several kids' books, and I think he's working on one that's for maybe high school level, I'm not sure, that basically tell my story, same as in the movie, An Ordinary Hero. And you can go to just Google Loki Mulholland and click on it and find his website and go from there, order the books and movies. I encourage you to support my son. He does good work, like he was brought up to do, but he is full of mischief, just like his name suggests. He lived up to it.
Brilliant. For the last question for all three of you, what progress have you seen, and what does progress look like?
Progress looks like community building. Progress also just means being supportive of people after you learn about the struggles that they are encountering, and being empathetic about it and asking questions. I think there was a moment where we weren't asking each other questions and we weren't having real conversations. And so whether that's because we were too afraid to ask, or whether that's just because, oh my gosh, this is really uncomfortable. So I love that now we're in a place where it looks like we're beginning to be more comfortable again with having those type of uncomfortable conversations, just so that we can build community and like I said earlier, really operate as neighbors and as a family.
And I just have to say, what does progress look like? It looks a whole lot like this. I mean, I would ask that you all give yourselves a round of applause, because frankly, the fact that, look, there's three people of color on stage and a person who fought in the civil rights movement online that's talking to you about diversity and inclusion efforts. Everyone's engaged, everyone's asking questions. You all are in the midst of COVID, wearing masks, sitting in a chair on a Thursday, waiting to hear more. This is progress. Give yourselves a round of applause.
And progress looks like my neighborhood here in Arlington. When I moved in about 50 years ago, it was all white. Now it's diverse, Hispanics, Asians, Jews, they've been kept out too. And it's nothing to see a mixed couple walking down the streets in the neighborhood out for their afternoon stroll. The school is a no majority school. The local supermarket is owned by an Asian family until the place got sold out and Harris Teeter moved in. But you can buy food from all around the world. You hear all sorts of languages being spoken. That's progress. And it'll be nice when the rest of the country reaches our level.
I would like to thank each of you for your time. Thank you for being here. That is the conclusion of the panel, and I will invite you back up on stage. Oh, I forgot. Darren asked me to talk about the podcast. We do. RevRoad is a proud sponsor of a podcast that is coming out next Tuesday called Inclusion Inc. Diversity at Work. You will hear these two beautiful voices on the podcast as well sharing more of their intelligence, opinions, perspectives. And it's a really great opportunity to kind of learn and hear a lot of different opinions from different perspectives. So tune into that. It'll be on all streaming platforms on Tuesday. Inclusion Inc. Diversity at Work. Check it out. Thank you so much. Thank you. Give it one more round of applause for our wonderful guests.
Thanks, Joan, for being here with us.
Thank
It
you,
was
Joan.
an
Thank
honor.
you for inviting me. Nice to meet everybody, albeit virtually. Maybe next time in person.